These award-winning homes are breaking building regulations and I've got the proof. I'm the unfiltered female site manager, and after 8 years in the field, I've seen firsthand how quality and safety are being pushed aside for profit. Let's crack open the golden thread, Part C and Part M of the building regulations, and see how these new builds are failing you. This video is part 1 of a multi-part investigation. What you will learn in Part 1 is what the golden thread really means and how it links to the Building Safety Act 2022. The basics of the Building Regulations 2010 Part C, site preparation and resistance to contaminants, and Part M, access to and use of buildings. What are construction company standard details, radon gas, and why it's so important to ensure subfloor ventilation is adequate, how rising damp actually occurs, and the details that should be followed to prevent it on new builds, what quality control looks like at an oversight, and how to read an external levels drawing and foundation drawing and snag like a pro. If you're a new build buyer or work in construction, this affects you. Part 2 is coming soon. I've inspected 29 new build homes across 7 different companies on 13 award-winning sites using Google Maps. And the truth? Regulations are being ignored across the board. Damp-proof courses are being buried or bridged. Air bricks or periscope vents are too low or omitted. It's possible some of these houses are even missing damp-proof courses. And sadly enough, on some of these new builds, I've already seen signs of damp. In Part 2, I'm also going to share who I believe is responsible for these failings of the regulations. 8 regions in England received awards this year, and I'm digging into each one to see what's really going on. Let's be clear. I believe in accountability. While I won't name and shame individuals, the facts speak for themselves. What I've found is damning enough without needing to point fingers. This report is about transparency, not gossip. You deserve to know what's happening behind the awards and the headlines. These new builds look great on the surface, don't they? But what if I told you the problems are buried just below eye level, and they're serious? Before we dive into the evidence in Part 2, I need to explain why this matters. Because if you've bought a new build in the last 10 years, this isn't just someone else's problem. It could be your problem too. In Part 1, I'll walk you through the regulations and explain the risks that could occur by not following them. It's going to be eye-opening, so stick with me, the good stuff's coming, and you won't want to miss it. This video highlights serious potential damp issues I've found on award-winning new build homes in what I'm going to call Region 1. Out of the 38 award winners, I checked 25 sites on Google Maps. 12 couldn't be assessed because they had not been built when Google last assessed the area, and some sites were just too far away. The 13 that I could fully see, every single one appeared to be breaching Part C building regulations, and yet they were still signed off and celebrated with awards. Like I said before, Part 1 is the story that you need to hear before you can listen to Part 2. But in Part 2, it will highlight 7 major developers, 13 award-winning sites, and 29 homes that do not meet regulations. It's time for transparency. I've based everything here on UK building regulations. I don't have the original drawings or specifications, so yes, I may have a few details wrong. I don't believe anyone can snag a home properly without the drawings for that property, but I can still snag building regulations. The one thing I know is right is that compromised DPCs and standard details that have possibly been ignored shouldn't be happening in new build homes in 2025. All of the quality falls on site managers alone. Where's the support from the technical teams? Why aren't the building control companies educating better? Why aren't the trades or the designers fixing these issues before it's too late? Why was I pulling this issue in 2017 on my sites and the same pattern has continued into 2025? It's always money first, quality second, and that needs to change. The golden thread and the Building Safety Act were supposed to protect people. This is me doing my part to hold the system to account. The golden thread and the Building Safety Act 2022 were introduced to stop exactly what's happening on new build sites today. Missing details, poor workmanship, and no accountability. The golden thread is meant to ensure every part of a building's design and construction is recorded, traceable, and accessible from planning to handover. This information must also be stored digitally. Although sadly, I believe the Building Safety Act primarily targets high-risk buildings, meaning residential buildings that are over 18 metres tall or over 7 stories, with at least 2 residential units. My dream and goal for this is to change that for homeowners of new build houses and flats that are not deemed as high risk, and I have a plan, but I need help to execute it. The Building Safety Act is trying to enforce you build it, you're accountable for it. Site managers are expected to deliver quality without the tools to do it, and buyers end up paying for homes that don't meet basic building standards. Homeowners are blinded by excitement and trust that their homes are compliant. How did the home get the certificate to say it was signed off by building control if the basic regulations haven't been followed? So here's the reality. Drawings aren't being followed. Critical details are being missed, and most people on site don't have access to the information they need. Or if they do, there's so much of it, they don't know where to start. A huge part of the problem is digital access. Drawings are now stored online, and unless you're confident with computers, it's daunting, especially under pressure. The truth is, many site managers, supervisors, and operatives, some of the most experienced people on site, simply aren't trained or supported in using digital systems or computers. They were promoted to site managers after careers as plumbers, bricklayers, carpenters. Not many administrators are promoted into site management. I was once told I was a niche in the industry. Someone who could both build a house and use a computer was a rare find. But the truth is, I could only build properly because I could use a computer, because I knew how to search, zoom in, and access the right information. The law has changed, but the culture hasn't, and that's what needs to shift, and fast. The Building Regulations 2010, Part C, Site Preparation and Resistance to Contaminants and Moisture. Are you buying a new build or planning an extension? These are the minimum legal standards your home should meet. Spoiler alert, many don't. From fire safety to insulation, structure to ventilation, every part of your home is meant to comply with these regulations, but builders cut corners more often than you think, and most buyers never even see this document. I've added a link to all of the approved documents for the UK building regulations in the description of this video. Part C focuses on protecting the building and occupants from ground moisture and water ingress, e.g. Risingdamp, contaminants like radon gas, toxic materials or fill, mould and decay caused by poor moisture control. Technical teams are responsible for working with building control to produce standard details that comply with building regulations at planning stage. These details are then handed over to site teams to follow on the ground. And just to put it into perspective, Part C, which covers site preparation and resistance to contaminants and moisture, is just one of 19 parts in the Building Regulations 2010. Anyone can access these regulations online. They're clear, well laid out, and even come with examples to make them easy to understand. So there's really no excuse for getting it wrong. Know what you're entitled to. Ask the awkward questions. Do your own research and make sure your home is built to the standard it's meant to be. What you're seeing on screen now is my interpretation of the Part C building regulations, specifically the guidance around damp-proof course height, which I'm now going to refer to as DPCs. I've added a dark green line onto this detail to clearly show where the DPC should sit. This isn't just a preference, it's a requirement for protecting homes from rising damp and long-term moisture damage. The Part C regulations are very clear. The damp-proof course must sit at least 150 millimetres above the external ground level. This height is essential to protect the home from rain splashback and rising damp, and yet I've seen it ignored again and again on award-winning sites. When I was studying the Part C regulations for this report, it's this detail on screen that got me. The regulations also specify that there must be a minimum of 225 millimetres internal cavity depth. That means the depth of the cavity from the damp-proof course down must be at least 225 millimetres. This depth is essential for preventing moisture bridging, ensuring proper drainage, and maintaining the long-term integrity of the building. I'll be honest, I didn't even know about this detail until I was studying the Part C document. I've got a level 4 site management qualification through the Chartered Institute of Building. I spent 8 years managing sites, 3 of those years managing new build housing sites, and I never once checked this detail. Not because I didn't care, but because no one ever taught me to. I was checking everything I knew to check, but this was never flagged, never explained, never emphasised. And that's the problem. We've normalised missing things, not because we're lazy, but because we're overloaded, undertrained and unsupported. On screen now, you'll see cavity wall insulation. The continuous S going up the middle of the cavity is what insulation looks like on a construction drawing. The diagram on the left shows a partially filled cavity and the diagram on the right shows a fully filled cavity. Within the Part C building regulations, there are details for timber framed walls. I didn't really build many timber frame structures when I was on site, but I believe they have become more and more popular now. So I wanted to mention that Part C refers to timber frame homes as well, for anyone who has bought a timber frame property. When you're looking at the Part C regulations, there's a map in the document. This map goes into full details about exposure zones. What are exposure zones? Exposure zones rate how much wind-driven rain a building is likely to face based on location, elevation and weather patterns. They range from Zone 1, which is the least exposed, to Zone 4, the most exposed. Why do they matter? The higher the zone, the more protection your external walls need, like wider cavities, different insulation and possible rendering. Most of the southwest, West Wales and coastal areas sit in Zone 4, meaning they need extra care when building to avoid moisture issues. Along with the map, you will find a table that shows which external finishes are recommended depending on your exposure zone. Now, I vaguely remember seeing that map on site, tucked inside the building regulation book, but honestly, I never really paid much attention to it until I created this report. And I bet I'm not the only one. Was it my job to check exposure zones? No, but maybe it should have been. This should have been addressed by the building control and technical teams during planning. The buyers should have sourced the right materials for me to call off. Surveyors should have specified the correct materials to the trades if they were meant to supply and install. But did I, the site manager, ever cross-check insulation types against exposure zones? No. Did I check the insulation type going into the cavity walls matched the specification? No. I trusted the team, not fully, but enough to believe this wasn't something they could mess up. Surely not insulation. Why didn't I check it? Because I was already doing the work of 3 people, managing sites alone, handling hundreds of health and safety checks, coordinating materials and trying to hit program targets, whilst snagging every plot to standard. I trusted that the chain before me had done their job. I never thought I'd have to question them. Looking back at this, I wish I'd known. I would have asked those questions loudly. Where should you use full fill versus partially filled cavities? Partially filled cavities are ideal for exposed areas, zones 3 and 4. These are the high wind driven rain locations. It's safer to be used in wet climates because it allows a 25mm residual cavity to drain moisture. Fully filled cavities are okay for sheltered areas, zones 1 and 2 of low exposure. It's cheaper and quicker to install. After watching the incredibly sad Grenfell documentary on Netflix recently, one thing was clear. Even when the right product is specified, someone always wants to cut costs. In construction, I've seen it too often, people caring more about costs than consequences, and honestly, that needs to change. We all need to be kinder and start caring more. So I have to ask, are the big house builders choosing cheaper and quicker? Or is someone lower down the chain quietly swapping things out? Because here's the bottom line. Full fill insulation in the wrong exposure zone or installed badly can lead to serious moisture issues. And if they've got this wrong, what else have they compromised? Do you know what type of insulation you have inside your walls? Is it correct for your exposure zone? Ask your builder for your standard details, insulation specifications, and any digital proof showing how your walls were built. They may not have the digital proof, but they should at least be able to provide you with the drawings they use to build your home. The Building Safety Act has been enforced for nearly 3 years now. Builders should be complying. If they can't provide this information, you have every right to ask why. Protect your investment, ask the right questions, and hold them accountable. The Building Regulations 2010, Part M, Access to and Use of Buildings. Part M ensures buildings are accessible and usable by everyone, including disabled people. It applies to both dwellings and non-dwellings. The key requirements are step-free access from the boundary or parking to the main entrance, wide doorways and corridors, accessible toilets and ground floor living areas, level thresholds and ramps with gentle gradients, switches, sockets and controls at accessible heights. How Part M and Part C work together. To achieve true accessibility, Part M, the building must first be dry, stable and safe from contamination, Part C. For example, a level threshold, Part M, must still prevent moisture ingress, Part C. Sloped paths or ramps for access must be properly drained to avoid damp problems. Ground levels and DPC must be coordinated so that access is easy but still meets moisture resistant standards. In short, you can't make a building accessible if it's not safe, dry and protected from the ground up. Part C sets the foundation, Part M builds on it. Make sure your home is built to the standard it's meant to be. Check out the regulations yourself in the link below. So what are construction standard details? Bear with me on this one, because understanding this is key to knowing why these problems keep showing up across many sites. This isn't just a technicality, it's the root of how poor quality work keeps getting passed off as acceptable. You can see on the slide how many different categories there are for standard details, and each of those categories may have multiple details for that category. When I got my first role on a large construction site, I was a trainee assistant site manager. Despite already holding my CIOB Level 4 site management qualification, having managed over 200 health and safety executive notifiable refurbishment projects for my local council, sure, I hadn't been on a big site before, but I already knew health and safety and quality control better than most of my colleagues. Over time, I began to understand the company's standard details, the core construction drawings used again and again across all of their sites. These weren't job-specific drawings, they were generic construction details, how to install cavity trays, vents, floor makeups, DPCs, brick junctions. The list goes on. There were 1,300 standard details in total for this company. Every site had a physical folder of them, usually missing pages because people wanted them out on site and they're never reprinted. But I preferred the electronic version because I wanted the full picture. Before I left that company, I built a searchable index to help others find what they needed faster. 1,300 standard details for one company, and site managers should know them all if they want to build the homes correctly. These drawings are now stored digitally, and we're expecting experienced site managers to find them using computers, even though many of them have never used a computer on site before. Let that sink in. No wonder mistakes get made when you don't have time to stop and look, and you've never been trained to either. Another problem with this digital storage is how the 1,300 files may be named. If they're not specific enough, how could anyone find what they're looking for? Maybe they're just numbered. Maybe they haven't got a description. I found that numerous times on site. It's a basic document control level of experience that needs to be set out at the start of a job so managers can find these drawings much easier. Gas membrane site, standard detail. I once worked on a site that had radon gas present. Every home on that site required a gas membrane to be installed. and a certificate was handed over by the competent installers to say it had been done correctly. Radon is a radioactive gas that naturally rises from the ground, and you can't see it, smell it, or taste it. But when it builds up in homes, it becomes a serious health risk. Long-term exposure to radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the UK, especially dangerous for smokers. It enters through cracks, service gaps, or subfloor voids, and it's worse in poorly ventilated homes. That's why we install radon barriers or membranes during construction, especially in known radon areas. Testing is simple and cheap, but the consequences of ignoring are deadly. Another link below to follow is the UK radon information. You can find out yourself if your home is in a radon gas area. I came across this detail on screen during a quiet moment while managing my oversights at the start of a job. It was my first chance to run a new build site from the ground up, but in reality I was stepping into phase 5 or 6 of a massive estate, built by the same trades who had already put up 500 plus homes, and they'd done it wrong. While this site was in a radon gas area, as I previously mentioned, the detail was clear to me. It made sense, but when I tried to implement it, no one listened. I had to sit in a meeting with over 20 operatives, their supervisors, and my project manager, who had been a labourer on that same site just a year or two earlier. Only one of them got it, and he didn't speak up in the meeting. He caught up with me after. No one backed me. I couldn't make them build to it, and the stress, it was relentless. I remember being dragged to head office by the technical director, one of the men who hired me. He told me, you need to improve your relationships on site. And when I asked him, well, what's more important, building to a drawing or building relationships? He looked at me and said, you have to build to a drawing. I was the only manager who had ever looked for and found that drawing, that detail. And I was being told to fix the culture of 200 plus operatives building homes wrong on a radon gas site. I believe every house builder has an external raised ground detail like the one on screen now. And if they don't, I really hope this video is a wake-up call they need. I've seen early phases on this same estate where the vents are buried under hard and soft landscaping, completely blocked. This is a radon site. The airflow needs to be right so those gases don't build up. It's not just one detail. It's the foundation of safe, lasting homes, and it's still being missed. I've reworked the details in the Part C regulations to share as clearly as I can my understanding of how rising damp occurs and why it matters. The damp proof course height is mentioned many times in the Part C document. I really need to stress this. The regulations clearly state that the DPC must be a minimum of 150 millimetres above the finished external ground level. In this detail, I've marked the DPC in dark green. You can see that the external ground level sits exactly 150 millimetres below the internal finished floor level, just as it should. This isn't a grey area. It's a clearly defined requirement, and getting it wrong leads directly to damp, rot, and long-term structural issues. In this detail, I've edited it with a rain line to help illustrate how splashback actually works. I've used a partially filled cavity for this example. You can see how rain hits the ground and bounces up. The arc shows how it lands just below the DPC. That's exactly the zone the DPC is there to protect, stopping moisture from being drawn into the wall through capillary action. When the DPC is installed at the correct height, it does its job. But when it's too low or when the ground is built up over it, like with soft or hard landscaping, that moisture doesn't just splash, it lingers, and that's when the risk of rising damp becomes real. Water enters the cavity through the brickwork, and just to be clear, brickwork is not waterproof. That's exactly what the cavity is designed for. It acts as a drainage and ventilation zone, keeping moisture away from the internal structure. But when the cavity is abridged, filled incorrectly, or the DPC is compromised, that moisture has nowhere to go, and it starts causing real damage. With the partially filled cavity, the water can run down the inside of the outer wall until it hits the wall tie. Once it hits the wall tie, it will then fall to the drip part of the wall tie and drain away into the cavity. Partially filled cavity. This time, the DPC has been compromised. In this detail, I've raised the external ground level so that it is in line with the DPC. And this is exactly how the DPC gets compromised. It's happening all over today's new builds. DPCs and periscope vents are being installed at scaffold base, but people forget these homes still need to be landscaped. Once the final ground levels are brought up, especially at the front to meet Part M regulations for level thresholds, the DPC ends up far too low, often in line with the finished ground level. It's not just bad practice, it's non-compliant and it's avoidable. I've added in the same rain trajectory to show the splashback again, but now there's no DPC protection, there's nothing stopping rainwater from hitting the wall and soaking straight in. Water enters the cavity through the brickwork, but this time, without a DPC to block it, that moisture is now rising up the wall through capillary action. Exactly what the DPC is meant to prevent. I'm not a damp expert, but from a common sense point of view, that setup might work if the cavity is deep enough and the water can safely drain away. But is the catch here that the drainage only works if the internal level of the cavity is at least 225 millimetres below the DPC? I mentioned this earlier that when I was a site manager, I never used to check that detail. But in most new builds, the problem is that the DPC is installed too low to begin with, 150 millimetres below what they should be installing at, especially around the level thresholds. I'm guessing if the finished internal cavity depth ends up higher than intended, the cavity could start to fill, and that's where damp starts becoming a serious risk. This is why it's so important that homeowners ask what type of insulation has been used in their walls. Do your own research. The guidance is out there and it's easy to access. And remember, under the golden thread, you have a legal right to ask for any information related to how your home was built. Let's have a look at that part 3 again and the capillary action. What is capillary action? Capillary action is what pulls water up through bricks and mortar, kind of like how a sponge soaks up water. It's caused by water sticking to surfaces and to itself, even against gravity. Without proper damp proofing, water from the ground gets pulled up through bricks and mortar like a sponge or even a straw. It brings salts and moisture with it, potentially damaging your plaster, paint, timber and floor finishes over time. How do we stop it? The DPC is a barrier that stops moisture rising through walls. But if it's missing, buried, installed too low, it won't work. And that's when rising damp starts to creep in. Maybe not so much of a problem on partially filled cavities. But what about fully filled cavities? Fully filled cavity and compromised DPC. In this detail, the cavity has been fully filled with insulation, and this is where things get more concerning. That moisture can now move not just down the cavity, but upward too, drawn up by capillary action. With no residual gap left, moisture can now bridge the cavity. That means water passing through the outer leaf can soak straight into the insulation and transfer across to the inner structure, damaging your plasterboard and internal finishes. To the best of my knowledge, this is exactly how rising damp starts to take hold, especially when the regulations haven't been followed properly. Brickwork isn't waterproof. That's why full fill insulation is not recommended in exposure zones 3 or 4, and it completely defeats the purpose of having a cavity in the first place. Now, I'm not entirely sure how effective wall ties are in a fully filled cavity, especially when it comes to managing moisture. Hopefully they allow at least some drainage or ventilation, but to be honest, once that insulation is saturated, there's nowhere for the water to go. And that's when the problem really starts creeping inside. Why does the Part C building regulations specify that 225mm internal cavity depth? I'm going to hazard a guess. I believe that extra depth helps manage moisture, ensures insulation sits correctly and allows for proper detailing around the DPC and floor slab. Without it, you're reducing the cavity's ability to do its job. In this detail, I have raised the internal cavity depth, and marked with a purple arrow what it should have been at. At this point, you've got to wonder, if moisture keeps entering and there's no drainage path, could the cavity actually start to fill up? Could it flood? In theory, yes, especially if the insulation becomes saturated and weep holes are blocked or missing. That's when moisture finds its own way out, usually into your home. If a cavity floods, the damage can be serious. We're talking about soaked insulation that loses all thermal performance, damp trapping into internal walls, plaster failure, mould growth, even timber decay in joists or flooring. And once that moisture is inside, it doesn't just dry out on its own. It can take months to fully resolve, cost thousands to fix, and in some cases, it never gets sorted properly at all. This isn't a snag. It's potential structural damage caused by cutting corners and ignoring the regs. Now, everything I've shown so far is all happening on traditional brick and block cavity construction, and that's bad enough. But imagine the same failure on a timber frame building. You're not just dealing with damp insulation or plaster damage anymore. You're risking the structural frame itself. Timber absorbs moisture quickly. Once it's wet, you're opening the door to rot, mould, and even a breakdown of the frame's integrity. And because it's all hidden inside the cavity, you often don't spot it until it's too late. A flooded cavity in a timber frame build is a much bigger deal because by the time the signs show inside, the damage is already deep and expensive. Soft landscaping and high water table. Up to now, all the details I've shown have included hard landscaping on external ground level finish. But what if the DPC is too low and the property is surrounded by soft landscaping, like turf or flower beds, in an area with a high water table? Ground moisture doesn't just splash, it sits, it saturates the soil, rises up through capillary action, and can push damp straight through the structure, especially if the DPC is below that 150ml threshold. These properties will need tanking to be protected, and there will be standard details for this. If you have a low DPC and soft landscaping, ask your builder for the site's tanking details and look for evidence that it's been carried out. Periscope vent at a stepped threshold. Now, the way some periscope vents are being installed today isn't necessarily a problem, as long as we're talking about a stepped threshold, like you'd find at side entrances or back doors. In this detail, you can see the base of the periscope vent is set 75mm above the external ground level. That clearance is critical. It ensures there's adequate airflow into the subfloor void. Why does that matter? Because on certain sites, gases like radon can build up below ground level without proper ventilation. Those gases can enter the home, and that's what the serious health risk is. The idea is simple. Air enters through the vents at the front of the property and flows through to the vents at the rear. This cross-flow helps prevent any build-up of gases under the floor, keeping the subfloor space ventilated, dry and safe. But for that to work, vents need to be positioned correctly and kept clear, because without airflow, the system fails. Level threshold periscope vent not compliant. These next few slides show exactly where new build companies are going wrong today. They build up the level threshold and install a secondary DPC, but they don't raise the periscope vents to match the secondary DPC. That leaves the vents buried or blocked with no airflow into the subfloor, which completely defeats their purpose and puts the home at risk. Now, some companies are trying to get around this by creating a 100mm gap in front of the vent, hoping that it will help airflow. But I'm not convinced this is enough. If airflow can't flow through, gases like radon and excess moisture don't get removed, they build up. And that's when safety, structure and internal finishes all start to suffer. Subfloor ventilation isn't just about preventing moisture and radon gas. It's essential for protecting timber from rot, stopping condensation and mould, keeping pests out, and even maintaining good air quality and temperature inside your home. Without proper airflow, the whole system starts to break down and the long-term damage can be serious. So how do you fix it? Simple. You follow the standard detail for raised external ground levels. If the company has a standard detail for it, of course, use it. If they don't, that's a problem in itself and it needs to be flagged at the very first oversight. Periscope vents are actually very easy to extend. All it takes is an additional centre section, which you can buy and fit on site. Yes, it costs a little more, but that small extra step could ensure compliance and proper ventilation. So why isn't it being done? Is it the cost, the effort? Either way, it's cutting corners and it's not acceptable. There's a guy I follow on social media. He's hilarious. Takes the mick out of how operatives talk on site. The other day he said, "I'm not buying it, I'm just building it, mate." Now it's funny the way he delivers it, but that mindset, that's the real problem on site. It's true. Too many operatives don't feel responsible for the finished product. And while they might not be the buyer, they are the builder. So how do we shift that attitude and get people to care again? The golden thread means that there should be a clear trail of digital proof that each home has been built in line with the drawings, the specifications and the regulations. But like I said earlier, only on higher risk buildings. Now I get that high risk takes priority, but homeowners have still spent thousands. They deserve to know that their home has been built properly. So let me show you exactly how that should look in practice. I'm going to walk you through how a site manager should carry out a quality control check at oversight stage, using a real example from how I used to do it. You'll see I'm using pen and paper, but under golden thread, this process really should be digital now. Still, I did what I could at the time. You can probably make out from my handwriting that I've flagged the air vents are too low, especially around the level threshold foundations. I also counted 6 vents at the rear and 7 at the front, because airflow through the void matters. There were 8 designed on the front, but 1 was missing according to the drawing that I snagged. If your substructure is built in sections with a solid wall in between and missing vents on one side, then the airflow won't pass through, meaning the void can't ventilate properly and those dangerous gases and moisture builds up. I inspected my oversight when it was at the following stage. On screen now, you'll see an example from part 2. Company 1, Site 1, Home 1. Here's a photo of an oversight showing periscope vents installed to DPC, just before the scaffold base goes in. Once the scaffold base is installed, ground level will sit about 260mm below the vents. I've marked this roughly on the photo in blue. I found this site while searching for award-winning developments on Google Maps, and this little gem stood out. Unfortunately, the rest of the site wasn't ready to view online, but this photo is incredibly useful. And this is exactly where the issue begins, because if it's not caught now, it probably never will be. These vents should actually be installed 1 course higher. Why? Because on homes like this, there's usually a level threshold at the front of the property. And that means a secondary DPC should be added to suit the raised ground levels. So why are they installed too low? Ground workers are usually instructed to build substructure brickwork up to DPC and install the periscope vent. I don't think they ever account for the secondary DPCs and that they need to build up to both DPCs. Do the ground workers fully understand the levels drawings? They're usually printed on site. They should do. Maybe all the ground worker supervisors need to go to Specsavers. I am seeing more sites using secondary DPCs, but the air bricks are still being left too low. That defeats the purpose. The vents need to be raised in line with the standard details and the levels drawings. That's how you prevent damp. That's how you build it right. On screen now is an example of an external levels drawing key. Very hard to read on a printed drawing, but super easy to see on a computer when you zoom in. Maybe the industry needs to introduce a computer competency course as a qualification before you can start work as a site manager. What a great competency check that would be. The red dotted line states, requirement for raised DPC, i.e. where external ground levels are less than 150mm below finished floor level, e.g. flush threshold entrance. Now here's the example to back it up. The levels drawing clearly shows raised ground levels all the way around this home. And for this company, that should trigger one simple response: follow the standard detail and raise the air bricks accordingly. It's not a grey area, it's black and white. Or red and white, I guess, in this situation. And yet it's still being missed. I have a theory about drawings. If you can read, then you can understand a construction drawing. They're not complicated. Don't let anyone fool you into thinking they are. Ask for them, check them yourself. This home has soft landscaping on every side. There's no hard surface to deflect or drain the moisture away. That's exactly why a properly raised DPC and adequate ventilation is so critical on plots like this. Without that 150mm separation from the finished ground level, you're inviting damp straight into the building. Imagine if this home has been built in an area with a high water table too. This detail should be followed all the way around this home, a secondary DPC with extended periscope vents. Do you think you could understand where your air bricks were supposed to be on your home? It's a box with a cross in it. It's not rocket science. I didn't go to school. I'm not the smartest woman in the world, but I do have common sense. And I will say it again. If you can read, you will be able to understand a construction drawing. Ask your builder for your oversight or foundation drawing. Check the periscope vent locations yourself. You don't need a professional to do this. You need confidence. Thanks for sticking with the educational part of this story. Part 2 won't make much sense if you haven't watched all of this video. Part 2 is coming soon. Regulation failures identified in 29 homes, 7 developers involved and 13 award-winning sites. And also who is responsible. Subscribe now so you don't miss part 2, where the real truth comes out. In August, I'm going to be running a monthly giveaway. I will be giving away 2 completely free full property snagging inspections in a monthly draw. This is an educational inspection only, not legal advice or formal certification. I'll be sharing my findings anonymously with your permission to help other buyers spot the same issues. With 8 years of site management experience, I'm here to offer honest, real-world advice you won't hear from your builder. Let's find out if your home is really built to standard. Full terms and conditions apply. See my website, transparencyconstruction.co.uk/monthly giveaway. If you have any questions about this video, drop a comment below or reach out via my website. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you've enjoyed it. Part 2 is where it really kicks off.